Bismillah. So we'll check, inshallah, that the live stream is working. Yes. طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وتبع هداه ثم أما بعد. Welcome everyone to this Amja webinar. I'm your brother Ahmed Khatir, and today we'll be discussing contemporary fiqh issues related to zakah. And when zakah is mentioned in America, then only two names come to mind. And alhamdulillah, they are with us here today. We have the Honorable Sheikhs, Sheikh Joe Bradford and Sheikh Man Qudah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them and reward them for taking time from their busy schedules to be with us today. And alhamdulillah, today we're going to go through the most important or the most frequently asked topics, asked about topics on zakah and contemporary issues. And we received many questions in our survey regarding what you would like to be discussed. Many of the questions are related to the topics of today, the theme of contemporary fiqh issues, and some of them are related to regular classical fiqh issues on zakah, like who from my relatives I can give zakah to, do I have to pay zakah on my jewelry, zakah in mudaraba, partnerships, and things that are classically and commonly found in the books of fiqh. So we are going to focus mostly on the contemporary issues, and whatever we have not answered because of lack of time in the hour that we have together, inshallah, I will do my best to get back to you on the email. Most of the fatwa that you have sent, if we don't get to it, you can, inshallah, expect an answer from us, or go back to our fatwa services. We have a fatwa chat service, fatwa hotline service, or we have our fatwa email services and our online portal. Most of the time you'll probably get me, so inshallah I'll get back to you on those things, and I'll do the best I can to follow up on what we didn't cover today with you via email. But today we want to focus on our major theme, which is zakah on contemporary fiqh issue, zakah of modern issues and zakah, modern issues related to zakah. So inshallah we'll start off with Sheikh Joe. He suggested a beautiful suggestion on talking first about the wisdom behind zakah and the virtues of zakah. And oftentimes we get right into the nitty gritty, legal aspects, but we don't take a step back and explain the beauty of zakah and the wisdom of zakah. So with permission from our elder Sheikh Man, we'll start with Sheikh Joe, inshallah, on that. And then Sheikh Man will give us a second introduction after that on the difference between zakah and taxes. Two important introductions we need before we get into our fiqh issues, inshallah. So Sheikh Joe, if you'd be so kind as to start us off, barakallahu feekum.
جزاكم الله خيرا. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه وبعد. Alhamdulillah, first of all, I'm honored to be sitting virtually with you both, and humbled to be in the presence of people of knowledge. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you both and increase you. I wanted to preface what we were speaking about today about some of the objectives and the purposes behind zakah. What I find many times, because we talk a lot about the ahkam, that the common Muslim doesn't realize that this is a very important act of worship, and that it is not the same as just giving money. It's not the same as just disposing of whatever extra income a person has. And so there's 5 points that I wanted to mention about the general objectives behind zakah and behind sadaqah in general. And the first is that zakah is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, as is narrated from Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Buniya al-Islamu ala khams," that Islam was built upon 5, and he mentioned a zakah. And the importance of this can't be diminished. It's important for us to remember that if zakah is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, this means that all of the means to being able to pay zakah are of utmost importance for the community, which means if a person does not have gainful employment or a means of earning, if they want to fulfill that pillar of Islam, then they need to be able to earn money. And after they have earned that money, they have the responsibility of then purifying that money. And when they don't, then they are failing in an entire pillar of Islam. And so if we're to talk about the completeness of our faith and the completeness of our actions in Islam, then we have to make sure that we are cognizant of the fact that zakah is one of the pillars of Islam that we many times neglect or fail to understand. Secondly, is that in obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in paying our zakah, and obeying His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in paying our zakah, we are not only, one of the objectives of zakah is for us to show that obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, and through that obedience, we're able to gain the mercy of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ, and obey Allah and the Messenger so that perchance you can be shown mercy. So any act of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an opportunity to gain divine mercy. Therefore, when we're calculating our zakah this Sha'ban and this Ramadan, we should do so with the mindset that I'm going to be gaining mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by facilitating mercy for others through the money that's going to be given, through the goods that are going to be given, through the general ability of others to sustain their livelihoods when they have no other way. Another thing that we have to realize is that our paying of our zakah is a test of our iman. That if you were to calculate the number or the gross income of Muslims in the United States alone, and you were to calculate the amount of zakah that is paid yearly, then we are falling grossly behind. We have the ability to solve a lot of social problems and eliminate a lot of issues. However, we don't want to give up the things that we love. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us, and He says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will not reach the pinnacle of piety until you give from what you love. And so zakah is one of those tests to say you love your money and you love the earnings and you love the fact that you put in so much effort to earn it. Now you have to give part of that away so that others can benefit as well. And then we also have to remember that the act of zakah is an act of purification, not just of our wealth, but of our soul. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا. Take from their wealth a duty that you purify them and cleanse them through. So the actual giving of zakah is an actual act of purification, not just of the filth that surrounds our wealth from the mistakes that we have made through earnings and the obligation that we have to give it, but it is a purification and a cleansing of our hearts as well, because we are giving up on the idea of being stingy and holding back and giving this minimum that we're supposed to give every year. And then lastly, the idea of zakah is one that should inculcate, or the objective of zakah is one that should inculcate an idea of humility in us, that we are connected to the poor and the needy in our communities and communities around the world, that we have them in mind when we are given that zakah, that we understand that there are people that do not have the favors, the material favors that we have, and that it is through them we are able to fulfill this pillar of Islam. Through them, by the permission of Allah, we are able to fulfill an entire pillar of Islam. Many of the Salaf used to say, ما عجب الفقراء يحملون صدقاتنا إلى الموازين يوم القيامة أو إلى الميزان يوم القيامة. How amazing are the poor. They carry our charity to the scales on the day of judgment. So we have to humble ourselves and know that if it were not for the poor and not for the opportunity to give zakah, then we would be missing that pillar and we would be missing out on a great deal of reward as well. So I remind myself of this first and foremost, as well as you, and I will leave it to Sheikh Ma'an.
جزاك الله خير. تفضل يا شيخ أحمد.
تفضل شيخنا. جزاك الله خير Sheikh Joe. Beautiful reminder and very beneficial. And with that first introduction, that leads us now to the second introduction we want to address. And actually, questions have actually come regarding it, alhamdulillah. So we're addressing a question that's come as well. And that is, what is the difference between zakah and taxes? Many people have asked, well, I already pay taxes in this country. Does that take the place of zakah? Especially since, these go to welfare programs and the like. And Sheikh Man, this is one of the main points. You always start off your zakat talks. MashaAllah, every day we open up Facebook. Sheikh Man is there talking about zakat for Muslims, and it's always the first or second point that you talk about. So please do not, keep that benefit from us today. I know you mentioned a lot, so please, if you could also enlighten us, what is the difference between zakat and taxes, and do they overlap?
طيب جزاك الله خير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ثم أما بعد. Usually I discuss the differences between zakah and taxes under the topic of substituting zakah by taxes, which is, as you said, Sheikh Ahmed, it's a very common question. I do pay tax to the government. Do I still have to pay zakah? And the answer actually is yes. There is no connection between the tax and the zakah for more than one reason. Maybe the most important one is that zakah is a religious obligation. So we Muslims are addressed by zakatul mal, whether we live in the United States or we live abroad. While taxes are a legal obligation, we pay zakah because we pay tax because we live in this society, regardless of our religion, whether people here are Muslims or Christians or Jews or non-religious or atheists. Everybody has to, as long as you live in this society here, as well as you work and you get paid, then you have to consider paying tax to the government. So the first one is that zakah is a religious obligation, while taxes are legal obligation. Also, recipients of zakah are divinely designated categories by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ayah that we all know by heart, إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين, etc., etc. While taxes are generally paid to enable functions of the state. So you pay tax, okay? You pay tax, you benefit from the tax some way, somehow. One of the differences as well is that the default rule is that you are not supposed to be a zakah payer and a zakah recipient at the same time. You are one of three different categories. You either break even, you do not have extra to pay zakah, or you are a wealthy individual, you pay zakah but you do not benefit from it, or otherwise you are a needy individual where you receive zakah from other people. When it comes to tax, actually, we taxpayers, we do receive, partially some of the money that we pay to the government. One of the differences when it comes to zakah calculation actually is that zakah is paid on one's remaining wealth, not on the total income and holdings like taxes. So you made, for example, $100,000 straight in 2022. When you file for the government, when you file for your for income tax, you start the math with the 100,000. Okay, if whatever is remaining in the month of Ramadan, where you mark your calendar for zakah calculation, zakah payment, if whatever you have in your checking account is only 20,000 and the extra $80,000 have been spent already, then you start your math, okay, your zakah calculation with the 20,000 and not with the 100,000. Also, taxes might be waived some way, somehow, but zakah cannot be waived no matter how far back it has accumulated. Some other differences, maybe quickly. Zakah rate ranges from 2.5% in most of the assets up to maybe 20% on zakat or rikaz or the treasury troves. Taxes could reach up to maybe 45% here in this society in the USA. No worldly return for paying zakah. When you pay your zakat al-mal, you are not expected or should not expect to receive anything in return. While taxpayers, as I said before, receive direct or indirect services from the money that they pay. This is actually briefly some of the differences between zakah and taxes.
May Allah reward you, Sheikhna. طيب, with those two beautiful introductions, we can now start discussing the contemporary fiqh issues related to zakah. And we will take the most commonly asked about ones and the ones that have come in the questions. And the first one is related to paper currency. And as the mashayikh, they know, paper currency, when it came out and people were starting to use it, the opinions of the ulama differed. How do we conceptualize paper currency? And so some said we're going to treat paper currency like trading goods. And some said we're going to treat it like a deed for a debt owed. And some said we're going to treat it like, fulus, the cheap materials used for small transactions like copper and so on. and some said that we're going to look at it like a substitute for gold and silver, and some said that paper currency is actually an independent currency in and of itself. And based on the position we take, this is going to affect us in rulings related to zakah and rulings related to usury. So this is an essential issue. So people are asking us, do we pay zakah on paper currency? And this is based on, again, which position that we take regarding how to view paper currency. So we can start with Sheikh Joe, inshallah. Do we pay zakah on paper currency, Sheikh?
Bismillah. So yes, on paper currency, as you had mentioned, the idea of paying zakah is intrinsically linked to the idea of whether riba or not applies to paper currency. And the overwhelming fatwa of most scholars nowadays is that paper currencies, fiat currencies, are to be considered to be replacements for gold and silver, that they have predominant value, maybe not absolute value, but predominant value in their use, and therefore the logic and the rationale of riba and the ideas of tafadul and all of those other concepts apply to them, and therefore we would pay zakat on them just as we would pay zakat on gold and silver. And a good rule of thumb is for one to ask oneself, if I would not accept someone to give me, if I would not accept to give someone $2 in exchange for $1, then I should also, in the inverse, accept that is now applicable for zakah, or that is liable for zakah. So if I won't accept riba in this thing because I treat it like money and I haven't, and I don't want to give away value, then I should also be willing to give away value in charity through zakah. And Allah knows best.
Allah yabarak fikum, Shaykhana. طيب, do we calculate the minimum threshold based on the value in terms of gold or silver, or what is more beneficial to the poor? Do you have a preference in this regard?
My personal preference has been to use silver because it was the most common currency during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Most of the ahadith that are narrated about zakah mention silver or dirahim, and quite frankly, in this time, because the amount of gold is so much higher than silver, we actually will have more people paying zakah if they use the nisab, or the minimum amount of silver, and instead of gold.
Sheikh Man, do you have a preference for this as well? Which one do we use?
Well, I would go with Sheikh Hood as well, because if you go with the silver one, you will be increasing the zakah payers, and this is way more beneficial for the zakah recipients.
Okay, great, inshallah. طيب, the next issue is how to pay zakah on monthly salaries. And the ruling on how to pay zakah for monthly salaries, as the mashayikh know and people listening may know, is based upon the ruling on paying zakah on newly acquired wealth. So when we have here newly acquired wealth, and that wealth is not the offspring of cattle nor profit from trade, but it's from the same genus, right? Or takes the same ruling as the genus of the already possessed wealth that you have. Then here the ulama, they differed on how to calculate in terms of the 1 year for your zakah and so on. Is it added to the original nisab, and does it take the same 1 year? So we know the positions of the ulama here may differ. So is there a particular way that you think would be the best for Muslims to calculate? We have some ulama, as you know, that say that the newly acquired wealth would be added to the 1 year, right, of the previously owned wealth. And some ulama, they said this is only for free grazing cattle. And some said that the newly acquired wealth here would not be added to the 1 year of the previously owned wealth. Rather, a new year would begin for the newly acquired wealth. So, some people may have heard of different opinions, may be confused. Is there a way that you suggest on how to pay zakah on your monthly salaries? We'll go with Sheikh Ma'an, inshallah.
I would rather Akhi, just keep it simple and focus on the main principles of zakah. We all know that zakah is to be paid on an annual basis, not on a monthly basis, right? And there is a wisdom, there is a reason behind that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to give you enough chance and enough time to invest the money and to make profit. And from that profit or that growth or that dividend that you make, you set off the zakah, the 2.5%. Okay, you pay it from the profit that you make. So paying zakah on monthly basis would defeat the purpose or the wisdom behind mandating zakah to be paid on an annual basis. This is one thing. The other thing, I would highly recommend that you do not worry about the cash flow that you experience, whether it is a paycheck that you receive from your employer, or otherwise the professional fees that you receive from your clients or your customers, right? Just keep receiving money and spend on yourself and your family members bil ma'roof, right? Without leading an extravagant lifestyle. Whatever actually is remaining accessible, completely owned by you in the zakat due date, most probably in the month of Ramadan, that's actually the zakatable money. As I said just a few seconds ago, zakah is to be paid on the remaining income. So let's say, for example, that you have a law firm. This is your like main source of income. So I would assume that 99.9% of the money that you have in your checking account is coming from the legal fees of your clients, right? Once that amount reached a nisab, which is $5,000 if you want to go with the nisab of gold, 85 grams of gold, approximately $5,000. Once you reach that nisab, whatever comes on top of the nisab is called the mal al-mustafad, like the extra or the gained money. That mal al-mustafad is taking the same rule of the nisab. If the nisab actually is zakatable on an annual basis, then whatever you have on top of that nisab will be added up to the nisab and you pay zakah on it. So you receive the check, let's say $20,000 just 1 or 2 days before the zakat due date, and you deposit that check. Next day in the morning, it was Ramadan, right? Do you have to consider paying zakah on that check? The answer is yes, because this is al-mal al-mustafad, or the extra money that you have received. So to keep it simple, akhi, salaries and professional fees are to be charged zakatul mal on an annual basis. Okay, and if you want to be accurate, you need to remember which month and which day exactly you constituted the nisab. That's technical. If you want to go with the book, that's technically your like the beginning of your hawl. In the real life, I would say it's close to impossible to remember which day and which time and which month we accumulated the nisab. So we just, just like, take it easy, as they say, and we set the month of Ramadan as the month of zakah calculation and zakah payment. So zakah is to be paid once a year in the month of Ramadan for those who receive like monthly or bi-weekly salaries. For those who receive professional fees, it's only one time zakah payment in the month of Ramadan, based on whatever is remaining, whatever is still there, whatever is spent throughout the whole year long actually is not to be taken into consideration.
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikhna. طيب, Sheikhna, since we're on this topic as well, there are kind of two related points. The issue of now, if we're picking one day in the year, as you mentioned, this is now related to the concept of paying zakat early. And so here, do you have a preference on the position on paying zakat early? As you know, this is a matter that's different upon amongst the fuqaha. Some allowed it, very far out. Some made it very short, the time you could pay zakat early for. And so, is there a particular preference you have on the issue of paying zakat early here when it comes to, as it relates to this?
My personal preference actually is to pay your zakah on an annual basis for that particular year, and not to prepay your zakah unless there is a desperate need, like certain circumstances where charity organizations are like calling upon the Muslim people, please pay us for the zilzal, for the earthquake, for example, in Syria and Turkey. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easier on them. If there is a desperate need behind prepaying zakatul mal, then go for it. Otherwise, just go with the calendar. Every single year, pay zakat for that particular year. That's my preference.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikhna. طيب, Sheikhna, this would also take us to the issue of subtracting debts and the like. And so this will be the last topic we can talk about to cover the issue of monthly salaries, and move on with Sheikh Joe on the issue related to stocks and mutual funds and 401ks. So, Sheikhna, as you know, the ulama also differed greatly on, do debts prevent one from having to pay zakah? So there are a lot of opinions on how debts affect paying zakah. Is there a preference that you choose on this issue?
Well, what I choose in this topic is to distinguish between the the due debts and the long-term debts. Like if something is payable on the spot in the month of Ramadan, for example, you do have a monthly payment for the house, for the mortgage, regardless of the status of the mortgage. You do have a payment for the car, for the appliances, for the furniture. You owe the IRS a certain amount of money. Okay, if you decide in the month of Ramadan to pay off all these financial responsibilities and debts and loans, you put them aside, you pay them to be excused from paying zakah on them, right? But the mistake that some people do actually is that they put all these due debts aside for calculation purposes only, and they pay zakah on the remaining, and then they just add up those duyun back to their wealth, and that's wrong. If you decide to pay them, if they are payable and due, you put them aside and you pay them, right? And you pay zakah on the rest. But if you do not have a plan to pay those debts, then you cannot deduct them to reduce the zakah, and then you keep them or you put them back in your account. I mean, this is not actually a good practice.
Mumtaz, alhamdulillah. So just to recap for our listeners, this last issue we talked about is the issue of zakah on monthly salaries, and we discussed kind of three fiqh issues related to this. The first was the issue of newly acquired wealth, and the second is the issue of paying zakah early. As we know that we mentioned, there are many differences of opinions. Some allowed it to pay as far out as you wanted. Some made it the time limit very short. Some didn't allow it at all. A lot of difference of opinion. And then the last issue related to this is the issue of how do debts and expenses affect your zakah, right? Do debts prevent one from paying zakah or not? And also this has a lot of differing regarding, how much and how much is the effect of, debts on zakah, and if they do affect at all. And so there are a lot of difference of opinion here. Some ulama, they said that if the debts are related to the rights of people, it prevent zakah, and some said that if it's, they differentiate between apparent and unapparent wealth, and some said it did not prevent zakah at all, and some says that it does, and prevents zakah for the amount that the debt covers. And so there are many different opinions. Alhamdulillah, Sheikh Man gave us the 3 points on these 3 issues here that we should follow. And with that, we'll move on now to the issue of stocks, mutual funds, 401ks, retirement funds, pensions. How do we pay zakah on these issues? So we'll start with Sheikh Joe giving us his preference and his advice on this issue. And of course, naturally we'd first talk about the issue, the ruling on investing in the first place, but let's just focus on zakah. And so, Sheikh, we have different types of people who invest in stocks and so on. Does that affect the way you would calculate your zakah?
Yes. So.
Oh, forgive me, Sheikh. I think it was muted on accident. Could you say that again? I was trying to mute myself.
No worries. I think it's important that we preface the statement about paying zakah on investments, that if a Muslim is going to invest in anything, that it should be something which is Sharia compliant, that its business activities are permissible, that its financials are in line with what that Muslim would do if he were running the business himself. And then in general, it's imperative for any investor to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way that they employ their wealth. There are a lot of other details, as you mentioned, about investing that could be mentioned, but this really isn't the time and place for that. So let everyone that's listening to this just assume that we're talking about completely halal, 100% Sharia compliant investments, and we're not talking about any of the other nuances that come up with companies that have mixed wealth. That said, a stock or a share in a joint share company is essentially a part ownership or a partnership in that company. So when you own a share in a company, you own a part of that company and you are a partner. And that share is representative of 2 things. It's representative of fixed assets, and those are things that are generally immovable, or things that are essential to the money-making activities of the company. And then there are something called current assets, and those are things like cash, inventory, receivables, intellectual property, and other types of soft assets, or things that are liquid. Given this, when you invest or when you buy a share, you're going to buy that share with a certain intention. If you're buying that share because you believe in the company and you want to invest in the long-term growth of that company and hold it for a year or more, you are a long-term investor. And therefore, you're going to treat that share in a certain way. Generally, you're going to pay zakat on the liquid wealth or the current assets that are found in those shares, and the fixed assets are going to be those things that you're not going to pay zakat on. If you are buying that share because you're simply looking to make money off of the difference of prices in the market, so you're for example, a day trader or a swing trader, you're not holding it for more than a year, but you're just waiting for the market to go up, and then you're going to sell and make money off of the market movement, but not the actual business activity, then in that case, you're going to pay on the total price of the share, because that's the asset that you're buying, or that's the object of sale that you've put your money into. Now, that's kind of in general for shares. What type of account you have it in will change that ruling based upon the access that you have to it. So, for example, if you have any cash or shares in a regular brokerage account that you actively trade, then you're going to pay in the full cash value of that brokerage account, because the brokerage account is accessible just like a checking account in the bank. You can pull money out of it and you can liquidate those shares very easily. If you have it in a tax incentivized account, then the general rule that I follow is that if you can access that money without penalty and you can treat it the same as your checking, then you will pay zakat on those amounts. And if you cannot, then you will defer zakat until you have access to that money, or you actually pull that money out. So, for example, if you have a 401k or a traditional IRA, you won't pay money on that, because both your contributions as well as the gains are tied up in an investment and are penalized if withdrawn. If you make a qualified distribution, you must pay zakat on that distribution. If, however, you have a Roth IRA is paid from after-tax contributions. Those contributions are accessible to you after 5 years, and you can pull them out freely and use them like you would use any money. You won't be penalized or taxed. Therefore, it's like you have money in the bank, and you should pay on that portion, but not pay on the gain. So, for example, if you put in $6,000 this year, and we're in 2023, and in 2028, that $6,000 grew to $8,000, then that year you're going to pay 2028, you're going to pay 2.5% of 6,000, and the last 2,000 is going to be deferred until you actually have access to it at the time of retirement.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikhna. Now, Sheikh Ma'in, since you are our Amja expert and a member of the Permanent Fatwa Committee, Amja has fatwas on this as well. So Sheikh Joe, he gave us his position and his view on these matters. We'd like to also, one of the purposes of these Amja webinars is to make known to the people what are the positions Amja holds on these issues. And so Sheikh Joe mentioned his position. As you know, there are many people are hearing a lot of positions. People personally come to me and say, I heard that this company says you should pay it this way. This Sheikh says you should pay it that way. You know, when it comes to these, the shareholders, who purchase shares to receive dividends, for the long-term investment, we have ulama who said that you should just pay 2.5% of the total value. We have those who say we should treat the stocks like, fertile land that is irrigated without labor, right? And the profit would be treated like crops. We have some who say that we're going to treat, these stocks like exploited assets, right? And so we have said, we have also the, famous position, I think, of Amja, which is, we would pay zakah in accordance with the percentage of zakatable assets of the company they hold shares in. Is this the position, this last one, is this the position of Amja? And what are any conditions or factors or anything else we need to know regarding, paying zakah on stocks when it comes to Amja's position?
I would first emphasize the fact that this is a very contemporary issue when it comes to how to calculate zakah on your retirement account in general. And we do have 3 different schools here. The first school actually says that there is no zakah on any kind of investment in the stock market as long as it is identified as a retirement account, because you are not supposed to touch that money until the age of retirement, and thus no zakah on it. And the other opposite school says that this is the big chunk of investment that you have, so you have to pay zakah on 100% of what you have in your retirement account. I think Amja actually is holding the stick from the middle, as they say, and going with a kind of like moderate approach. So our official position as a fiqh council is that we say that we go with the withdrawable amount, right? Or the accessible amount. Accessible amount. Let's say, for example, you have like $1 million straight worth of investment in your 401k, and in the month of Ramadan, if you decide to apply for humanitarian case or hardship, you will be having access to 50% of that account. So the accessible amount is $500,000. Now, this is not the take-home amount. This is only the accessible one. If you decide to proceed, as Sheikh Hood mentioned, you'll be penalized. Sometimes you have to pay tax and penalty and processing fees and admin fees and so on and so forth. So theoretically speaking, you do all the math and you find out how much is the net amount or the take-home amount. That amount actually is the zakatable one based on 2.5%. Why we are choosing 2.5%? Because this is actually the easiest way to calculate. Otherwise, as you know, Sheikh Ahmed, even those stocks that you have in the stock market, some of them actually belong to trading business. Some of them belong to industrial business, right? Commercial business. And every single category actually does have its own way of calculating zakah. But just to keep it easy and simple for the Muslim community, we would say go with the withdrawable amount. And when we say the withdrawable amount, it doesn't mean that you have to physically withdraw it. It's just like a theoretical calculation to find out how much is your zakah, right? So you go with the withdrawable amount, accessible amount, minus any prescribed, penalty, tax, whatever. Net amount actually is the zakatable one. Now, from that net amount, if you want to be in the safe side, you just pay 2.5% zakat rate, right? And if you want to go with the book, like without paying any extra money on top of the zakah, you can still deduct the fixed assets that Sheikh Joe actually referred to. I would say between 15 to 20% from that net amount. You take it away, and then the net of the net is the zakatable one, based on 2.5% if you pay your zakah in the month of Ramadan, based on 2.575 or 77 if you pay your zakah in the month of December. So it depends on which calendar you follow.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikhna. Yeah, this issue here is one that there's so many opinions out there, and every person is following a different fatwa, subhanAllah. And we have those who say that for 401ks, you should pay 2.5% of the total every year. Some said you don't pay any zakah, so you're able to access it penalty free. Some say you pay zakah in all the years, but you can wait until you can access without penalty, and then pay for the previous years. And some said, like the Mashaykh were mentioning here, that one would only pay zakah every year on the amount they could access after taxes and penalties. Now here, one of our Mashaykh in Amja actually said that the amount of penalties and taxes that you would be taxed would be about 40%. So you can only take away 60%, before a certain age, when you can access it penalty free. And so here you'd be paying on 60% because of that 40% you'll be charged. But some of the same item also said that you can estimate that about 1/3 of the stock market is zakatable. If you can't go and look at the financial reports and see what are the zakatable assets that you have invested in those companies you've invested in, and it's hard for you to do so, you can just estimate 1/3. So you'd actually be paying for the zakatable assets, you'd be paying 1/3 on that 60% you can walk away. So in reality, you're paying 2.5% on the 20%. So the total will be 0.5% of the grand total would be the zakah that comes out of that comes to you on your statement from the company of that total. So do you agree, both Mashaykh, on this concept of we can just estimate it's 1/3, or another one of our Mashaykh and Amja said this opinion of 1/3 should, we should only go to it if khalas, there's no way for you to calculate, and so then we can go to that position. But you should not just automatically estimate and assume it's 1/3 of the stock market is zakatable. So do you have any positions or feedback on that comment? Because that's one that has gone around a lot and people are asking about it. Maybe start with Shahman.
I'm not certain that I understand it fully, but I do think that one thing that I've noticed from there's 2 points that I think that need to be mentioned, especially for the viewers. Is number one is, as Sheikh Ma'in had indicated, these are ijtihadi issues. These are issues that are very contemporary, and that you should expect to hear different things, because the way that different scholars look at things will differ based upon the sources and the characterizations of those accounts with them. So this is not necessarily a bad thing. This is one of the great features of our ummah, is that we care enough to have opinions until things until either a number of those opinions settle or all of the scholars settle on one. And it actually shows the liveliness and the active engagement of the scholars with the modern world. So for anyone who's watching and thinks, why is there a difference of opinion? The differences of opinion are because people do care. You're asking the questions and the scholars are answering, and those scholars are, like yourselves, human beings that are trying to gather as much information about that as possible. The second thing I think is very important for anyone who goes to a scholar for a fatwa, or goes to a council like Amja for a fatwa, is understand your own situation before you ask the question. Many people have 401ks only because their companies sign them up for them automatically. They have an IRA because one of their family members told them that they need to do it. They have a pension because the company just gives it to them. And they don't fully understand their benefits, the defined benefit plans that they have, and they don't fully understand where they're putting their money. And it's the responsibility of every Muslim to be cognizant of where they put their money before they go to the scholar and ask, because al-hukm ala shay far'un an tasawwurihi, the famous Shar'i principle is that to rule on something is contingent on conceptualizing it. So if you can't conceptualize it and express that clearly to the scholar you're asking, how do you expect him to? And so every individual has a responsibility to look at those things, understand where their investments are placed, what rules apply to certain types of accounts versus others, and then go and ask the question so that a scholar can give you an answer particular to your situation in the clearest and most concise way possible.
May Allah reward you, Sheikh. Sheikh Man, also you were commenting on this as well. Do you have any comments on this last issue that I was mentioning?
Wallahi, I would just leave it as flexible as it is, and each mustafti, can approach the mufti that he feels more comfortable, asking. I always say, like in my lectures and presentations, that even if you believe that Amja position is the most reasonable one and you did not pay zakah for the last 20-25 years, please do not backdate the fatwa. Do not start like calculating zakah from the very first day that you received salary or you opened a retirement account. You can just apply it from now on, because it's all about independent reasoning or just ijtihad. Yes, Amja is a fiqh council, but there is no assurance that our position is the most accurate or the most correct one. We might be right, we might be wrong, Allahu alam. It's just a contemporary issue. And as Sheikh Hood mentioned, that it depends on the scholar who analyze and scrutinize the situation, what kind of interpretation he has, what kind of madhab he follows. Based on his own understanding, he comes up with the fatwa. So I would rather just keep that flexibility as is, and let just people and mustafteen to follow whatever madhab they would prefer to follow. On a personal level, I do believe that Amja position is the most reasonable one. We are not like waiving the retirement account 100% or excusing from zakah, and we are not mandating zakah 100%. We say whatever you have an access to, in a very simple words, whatever accessible is zakatable, whether it is IRA or like employer-based retirement account, individual-based retirement account, doesn't make any difference. Whatever accessible is zakatable. As simple as that.
May Allah reward you, Sheikh. Type Sheikh, now maybe we can move on to another one related to investing in stocks is the issue of investing in bonds. And again, I mean, it's clear that bonds are not permissible to invest in, right? They're a form of usurious loans, and Amja has a statement on this. But let's say someone did invest in them. Would they have to pay zakat on them? And this issue goes back to, as you know, Mashayikh, two fiqh issues. The first is, what is the ruling on zakat for debts owed to you, and what is the ruling for zakat on impermissible wealth? So if someone came to, Sheikh Joe or Sheikh Man, I forgot who went last. Sheikh Joe maybe is next.
Sheikh Man start.
Sheikh Man's turn. Type. Forgive me. So if someone came to Sheikh Man and said I invested in bonds, is there any obligation in terms of zakat here?
Well, I need to emphasize first that investing in bonds is not a halal option for practicing for Muslims in general. However, if it did happen, then we have to wait until the maturity of that T-bill, or the like upon the maturity of that bond, whenever it is paid back, okay, the principal is zakatable. The principal, let's say $5,000 bond brought $500 interest, right? So you received 5,500. The $5,000 upon receiving them are still zakatable because the principal is still halal. Now the extra $500 is to be disposed because that's the straightforward interest, haram gain that has to be getting rid of. And Allah Ta'ala tayyibun la yaqbal illa tayyiba. So paying zakah on those $500 extra does not purify them. They are still actually haram money. So the principal is zakatable based on 2.5%. The extra riba gained actually is to be disposed.
Sheikh Ma'an, would you allow me to ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Would the person who has the bond of say $5,000 and they've earned $500 interest, so the total is $5,500, do you view that they pay zakah on the total $5,500, then give the remainder above the $5,000 away in tathir, in purification, or do they give the $500 away first in purification, then only pay 2.5% on the capital?
I would go with the second opinion because the 500 in our example is the straightforward interest. I mean, this is the pure haram interest gain. That is the disposable part. Now the principal is the $5,000. I mean, that's still zakatable, but you don't pay zakah on it while it's still like immature. Upon the maturity and receiving the money, you pay zakah on it because, as you know, that zakah is like wajiba, like one of the conditions is al-mulku tam raqabatan wa yadan, full ownership and full access. The money technically is yours, but it's not accessible. It's still like on the hand of the government until it is paid back, and then you keep that principal. You pay zakah on it, and you dispose the interest. Allah.
May Allah reward you both, mashallah. We're learning so much from you, mashallah. And we'll just skip. I usually like to allude to that the differing of the ulama classically on these issues. And subhanAllah, I always, this is my main area that I work with, is doing takhrij for modern issues based on what classical scholars have spoken about. And that's why I always like to allude to, well, this issue, goes back to what, these fuqaha said about this and this and this. Alhamdulillah, our sharia and our legal corpus, our fiqh works have the information in there for the one to deal with these issues in the modern period. Many people think that the sharia or fiqh is not suitable. And so I always like to allude, to where we're getting, coming from. And these two issues that we're talking about, paying, the issue of zakat and debts owed to you and zakat and impermissible wealth. Also, there are opinions mentioned by the fuqaha. We're running out of time. We only have about 12 minutes, so I won't allude to the differing on this issue. But let's move on to now zakat for checking accounts. You did allude to it earlier, Sheikh Joe, but just so if we can just make it separate, when it comes to checking accounts, do we consider this to be a loan from the owner of the wealth to the bank, or is it a trust, or do we combine between the two with istihsan somehow? What do you say on this issue, Sheikh?
So the taqif fiqhi is the fatwa of most scholars has settled that any money that's given to the bank is considered a loan from the account holder to the bank. The nuance that I see that's sometimes missing is the differentiation between the checking and the savings account, in that the checking account is on demand, and the savings account has a limit as to the amount of withdrawals. However, I would say that generally, because it is available on demand, and it is liquid. One can spend from it freely day after day, that they should pay zakat on the total amount. And I think it's very important to preface, especially for those who are watching, that there's no difference as to the type of account as long as you have access to it. So checking, savings, a brokerage that has cash in it, um, if you have an escrow account that you have cash and that you have access to, that you have cash in your sock drawer, in your dresser at home, wherever you have cash and that you have access to that's liquid, you would pay zakat on it. Wallahu a'lam.
Sheikh Man, do you have anything to add on this issue on zakah for checking accounts?
Yeah, I agree with Sheikh Hood, and I would add, regardless of the reason behind holding the money. I mean, some people think that if you are holding that money for Hajj purposes, for purchasing a house, for paying the tuition fees of your kids, for getting married, like for single people, they think that this is for consumption purposes, thus unzakatable, and this is incorrect. Once you accumulate a nisab and that cash money is owned by you, accessible 100% by you, and one lunar year already passed, then you have to pay zakah on it regardless. And I would add to that, even the cryptocurrency nowadays, since it is like imposing itself on the society, it's a kind of currency. So it is equivalent to, to the cash that you do have in the checking account. Thus, the market value of the cryptocurrency that you have in the zakat due date is zakatable in full, because it is owned and accessed in full.
Well, since you mentioned cryptocurrency, anything else we should add about zakah for cryptocurrency, since it was brought up, or should we move on?
Cryptocurrency is a currency, so it is zakatable, as simple as that. I mean, as I said, it is imposing itself. I mean, maybe we do not feel comfortable counting it as like like legal tender or regular currency. But again, I mean, it is there. I mean, it's going nowhere. So and by the way, the IRS in the United States starting charging tax on cryptocurrency starting 2021. So this is a kind of unofficial acknowledgement that cryptocurrency is a currency in the United States. So if it is a currency, then it is zakatable. Maybe Sheikh Wood disagrees with me. I don't know.
No, I agree completely. The only thing that I would add is that if you hold cryptocurrency, many times people wonder how are they going to evaluate it for the purposes of zakah. So you can either value the cryptocurrency that you hold in your local currency and then give from your local currency, or give the from the crypto. So if you have a way to give the cryptocurrency directly, then you can give that cryptocurrency. Otherwise, you can value it into your local currency and then give in your local currency. But how do you decide what is above or below the nisab? The great thing is that there are different coins out there that are based upon, they're tethered to either gold or silver. And you can use those coins for determining what the exchange rate is between these, gold-backed crypto or silver-backed crypto and other cryptocurrencies, and then be able to use, an exchange or a swap like Uniswap or others to be able to determine the if you've met nisab for the cryptocurrency. And if you have many different types of currencies, then you can convert everything to your local currency and calculate it all at once. The important thing, as Sheikh Ma'an said, is that it's something that holds value and has been recognized either officially or unofficially, and therefore it needs to be included.
May Allah reward you both. And next, moving on to the next and probably the most frequently asked issue, since we only have 7 minutes left, is the issue of giving zakah to mosques, Islamic schools, Islamic institutions. This is a very controversial issue these days, especially here in America and in the West. Many articles have recently come out on this issue and rebuttals, and Amja does have a declaration and fatwa on this. And even one of our mashayikh, they put out an extra response defending the position when there may have been some critique of this position. So we'll start actually with Sheikh Man, if you don't mind, Sheikh Man, but I do want both of you to comment on this, since it's such a big issue. We all know the difference of opinion between the majority of scholars and the minority of scholars, especially regarding the issue of what is considered to be in the path of Allah. And based on this, everyone is using this in a different way for their institution. So Sheikh Man, do you mind telling us what is Amja's position on this, and if your personal position agrees or disagrees? And then we'll talk to Sheikh Joe on this as well, and maybe this will lead to a conversation that we'll end with. If not, we'll move on to the next issue, inshallah. تفضل شيخنا.
Yeah, when it comes to Amja position, we are of the opinion that fi sabilillah, for the cause of Allah, has more than one interpretation. It doesn't have to be like limited to the physical or the military legitimate jihad activities. Even if you want to go with the literal understanding, fi sabilillah means like, jihad. Jihad itself actually means, to strive to achieve something, right? Even the Quran itself actually indicated the educational jihad. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was talking about the Quran, he said وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادٍ كَبِيرًا. Jihad through the Quran, through education, through like discussing or debating or interfaith dialogue, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, back to Amja position, we are of the opinion that we do have some flexibility, and that flexibility is not something that we created or we innovated. It has been well established in the four madhahib. Yes, this is not the mainstream fatwa, right, in the four madhahib, but actually the opinion that Hajj is fi sabilillah actually is there. Even the Prophet ﷺ said, "Jahidu mushrikina bi-amwalikum wa alsinatikum." So when you apply jihad to defend the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to the hadith, it could be a physical one, it could be a financial one, it could be through education. So if we are living in a Muslim society where there is a budget and like a Ministry of Islamic Affairs, and it has its own budget to take care of the like masajid and Islamic institutes, then I would rather go with the mainstream fatwa that zakah is not to be given to masajid. Here in the USA, it's a purely secular society. All the places of worship, whether they are synagogues or churches or masajid, are not sponsored by the federal government or the state government or the county government. They are sponsored actually by the congregation of that particular, religion. So all the masajid are paid from the pockets and from the, sadaqah and donation of the Muslim community. Likewise for the Jewish community, likewise for the Christian community. If there is a legitimate need, right, for paying zakatul mal to sponsor masajid and Islamic institutes like, like civil rights institutes or charitable organizations or educational organizations, if those institutes are asking for zakah, and the zakah payer actually trust the leadership of that, institute or that masjid, they're asking for zakah, their need for zakah, and the zakah actually payer thinks that this masjid or this organization is doing a good job in serving the Muslim community. So 3 conditions: you have to believe that they are doing a good job and you need their service. Number 2, you trust their leadership. And number 3, they ask for zakat. They make it clear that the sadaqah and donation and contribution and membership are insufficient. We do have such and such project, needs such and such amount. We do not have money. Give us your zakat. If those 3 conditions applied and met, then paying zakatul mal to sponsor the masajid and the Islamic institutes, whether construction or maintenance or expansion or overhead expenses, I would say that yes, you can pay zakat al-mal, because you are living outside the Muslim world, where the Islamic work actually in this society is sponsored, exclusively by the Muslim community, with no like external support from outside.
May Allah bless you, Sheikhna. Sheikh Joe, do you agree, disagree? Anything to add? Anything to discuss on this issue?
I believe I take a bit of a differing perspective on this. I agree that with Sheikh Ma'an that yes, there are a variance of opinions in the classical madhahib about what is or is not included under the rubric of fi sabilillah. There's no doubt about that. I do believe, however, that even with dealing with this issue, that there is a difference with context, meaning that a community that lives in rural Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina that is trying to establish a masjid because they have no other source of congregating and saving their children's iman, living amongst disbelievers and not connected to the broader community, is much different than, say, Southwest Houston, where almost every other street we have a masjid, and many times the masjids are vanity projects. They're not being run by scholars or people that are in tune, but with what the community needs. But there are many times bloated budgets and a lack of responsibility in spending. So I believe that any community that's going to claim that they are in need of zakat funds should be able to substantiate for the community, number one, why that need is legitimate. And then also, number two, should have an independent body of scholars and experts that can attest to the fact that that is something which is needed and not just use the general fatwa. As many times I've seen across the country that the poor, the indigent, those in debt, refugees, many times will go without in many communities around the United States and even in Canada, while we have very large capital projects for Islamic institutes and masjids. There's no doubt that there is a need for these things, but I believe that we do have the affluence in our community as well to pay for them from our general sadaqat, and that the zakah should only go to those things which were designated in the categories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned. And when exceptions are being made, they should be qualified on a case-by-case basis.
May Allah reward you, Sheikh and Sheikh Man. And we've come to the end of our hour. We have so many topics we want to discuss. Maybe we'll take just one more that many people asked about, and then in the future, maybe we can have a part 2 or address these on email, inshallah. The concept or the issue of non-profit organizations collecting, that collect zakat, taking a portion of the zakat. So we know, we talk about state-sanctioned collectors of zakat, being from zakat recipients and so on. Do charitable organizations that collect zakat fall under this category? And so these organizations, they have employees. Can they pay them from the zakat wealth? And we know the scholars differed exactly who exactly is considered, part of this process falls under this category. We have those who included everyone needed in the collection process, those who record and weigh and count, and those who limited it, and so on. So who can be paid, and in general, can they take? And then are there particular employees that should be paid in this organization? We'll take both of you, inshallah, as well. So, Sheikh Man, if you could start us off. Allah barik fikum.
Let's differentiate between collecting zakah in the Muslim world, where there is a Muslim government that is taking the responsibility or allowing individuals to take the responsibility of collecting and distributing zakatul mal, versus living outside the Muslim world. Let's talk about our situation, Muslims living outside the Muslim world, where there is no Muslim authority. There is no jurisdiction here. It's just individual or collective efforts from different organizations to collect and to distribute zakatul mal. We need actually to appreciate and to thank those Islamic organizations who are taking the collective responsibility of collecting money and distributing zakatul mal, because they are doing a job that is among furud al-kifaya. They are taking that responsibility on behalf of the Muslim community. Now, this is an organization that does have overhead expenses and some other expenses. And according to the Quran itself, according to the Ayatul Zakah, al-amilun alayha, the zakah workers are legitimate zakah recipients. Now, sometimes the concept actually is correct, but the application might be a kind of incorrect, right? If we exaggerate, if we overpay those zakah workers, then we are doing something wrong. So to establish a fiqh rule here, are those workers for Islamic organizations, especially the charity organizations, are they eligible zakah recipients? The answer is yes. If someone actually does have a certain qualification and he or she wants to work for corporate America, right? If he will be receiving $80,000 annual income, annual salary, then that individual deserves to take $80,000 if he works for a charity organization. I mean, we should not underestimate and belittle what those or underpay what our brothers and sisters actually do, those who work for Islamic organizations. So to establish a fiqh rule, yes, I mean they are definitely eligible zakah recipients. Now, how to apply this concept? We might have a kind of abuse or misuse of the fund. Sometimes, like, we exaggerate in paying like overhead expenses, salaries, bonus, over time and so on and so forth. So the simple answer is yes. However, we need to be conservative and dutiful actually and righteous enough in watching what we spend, because this is the community money and we are interested by the community to collect the fund on their behalf and to distribute the fund on their behalf. Yes, we should actually pay the zakah workers, but we need to be fair and just enough. Do not underpay them, but meanwhile do not overpay them.
Allah yabarak fikum, Sheikhna. Sheikh Joe?
I agree. I think the only thing that I would add is that in the organizations that are going to represent to the community that they are collecting and distributing zakah, that there are a few things that need to happen. Number one is that they themselves, if they're going to be distributing zakah, they should be organizations which are specifically working in the 8 categories of zakat recipients, meaning that an organization which is a general organization doing almost anything to represent to the community that we accept zakah, and then they only spend it on themselves, or it doesn't go to a legitimate zakat recipients beyond themselves, is to me questionable. Secondly, is that they have a zakat policy in place about how that money is going to be collected, accounted for, and then spent. And as Sheikh Ma'in had rightfully pointed out, that the wages are fair and honest and transparent. And I would say thirdly as well, that there has to be some form of third-party oversight, at least some type of audit that can happen from year to year, so that these types of things are not abused. And I would add that there is a difference between organizations that collect zakah as a wakil, as an agent for you, and then send it to organizations that work with the zakat recipients or to the poor directly, and an organization which essentially is doing the work of Bayt al-Mal when there is no Bayt al-Mal. As Sheikh Ma'in had pointed out in the beginning, we don't have ministries, we don't have an Islamic treasury, and so when organizations like this are doing an important function of stepping in to facilitate that for us. But there are also other organizations who are sometimes nonprofit and sometimes for-profit, who will collect zakah as simply as a what's the word that I'm looking for? As a payment processor, okay, and a conduit for getting that to organizations that do the work, and they will sometimes charge payment fees. Those people who are acting as wakil, who are acting as agents, then you have to pay the fees that go to them. Otherwise, let's say, for example, you're paying $100 in zakah, and you have a fee of 1%. In reality, you've only paid $99 of zakah when your obligation was to pay 100. So you would have to give 101 so that you can make up the fees, so that the full amount is going to go to the zakat recipients, as the wakil is not a legitimate recipient of zakah, nor are they responsible if your zakah is lost. So if your zakah was lost, you would still be obligated to pay it. So be cognizant of who you're giving your money to and who you're paying it through, so that your money is the most effective for the zakat recipients in the end.
May Allah bless you, Sheikhna. And with that, I'm afraid we have to end. Our time is up. SubhanAllah, we have so many, we have so many things we could have talked about in terms of contemporary issues related to zakah. We could have talked about zakah for copyrights and zakah for, factories and many other things. And many other questions also came, like we said in the beginning, that were not related directly to contemporary issues on zakah, but classical issues that easily, inshallah, can be, answers for them can easily be accessed, like zakah on jewelry and zakah on the ruling on giving zakat to relatives and zakat for mudaraba partnership and many other issues that are commonly known and by the imams and so on. So hopefully, since we weren't able to get to those, people can get answers to those. But inshallah, like I said in the beginning, all the questions that came, I'll do my best to answer them on the email. And you can always go back to Amja Fatwa Services, our Fatwa Chat and Fatwa Hotline and Fatwa Portal. And most of the time, like I said, inshallah, it'll be me answering you. So I'll do the best I can to get back to everyone. If not, then hopefully maybe we can do another part 2 session with our honorable mashayikh. And like I said, when zakah is mentioned in America, then 2 names come to mind. The honorable sheikhs, Sheikh Man and Sheikh Joe. May Allah bless them, reward them, and accept from them, and make our gathering here today solely for his sake and approve for us, not against us on the day that we meet him. And we hope they will honor us with their presence in the future. Again, maybe when we do our segment on financial transactions and for Muslims in America. So I'm kind of hinting right now that they should expect to be with us, and hopefully they will agree. They'll agree.
You're going to pay zakat al-ilm anyway.
You have to pay zakah on that knowledge, Sheikh. Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
May Allah bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our listeners and viewers, and stay tuned, inshallah, for hopefully a monthly Amja webinar on various fiqh issues related to Muslims in America. Thank you all. Barakallahu fikum. هذا وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام.
ورحمة الله وبركاته.